Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I hope you had a nice lunch break. Enjoyed very much seeing the conversations and being involved in a number of conversations myself. And I very much look forward now to the second half of the day with another session with exciting presentations on our topic, as well as looking forward to the panel then, being increasing interactivity here among all participants then after the presentations. A great pleasure to me to welcome Amy van Looy, now from Belgium, from Ghent University. And she will start off with a very nice presentation on non-technical issues. And you see that this is now an opening presentation for a slot, for a session, which looks into capabilities and emerging technologies. So opening up a little bit more to organizational issues which are related to innovation in a digital world driven by business process management. Amy holds a PhD in applied economics. She's an assistant professor at the Faculty of Economics and Business Administration at the University of Ghent. Amy did her PhD in the field of business process management. Some of you might definitely know her work on maturity models. Springer has just published Springer Briefs, and the new Springer Briefs series on business process management, which some of us support here. Thanks also for the support, and Amy has just published the essentials of her PhD in this particular series. So I'm very happy to have you here. She has been very influential in the area of non-technical issues related to BPM, and I very much look forward to your presentation, linking this to innovation in a digital world. Thank you very much. Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for the warm welcome, Jan, and also for inviting me, of course. I would like to welcome you all to my presentation, in which I discuss the non-technical aspects of business processes and how they relate to innovation. And first of all, I want to start with a small definition, because when I talk about digital innovations, I mean innovations that are enabled by IT. You can see the pictures on the slide. I use them to organize my talk. So the pictures on the left are the more technical aspects of business processes. They represent process modeling, deployment, and optimization, while the pictures on your right symbolize the more non-technical aspects, which I will explain in more detail on the next slides. But first, I will explain that there is an interrelationship between IT and business processes. So on the one hand, innovations in IT and innovations by IT may support business processes, like continuously improving processes with proponents like Harrington, but also for creating new business processes with proponents like Hammer, Champy, Davenport. The most well-known concept is probably BPR, process reengineering, which sees IT as an important enabler for radical process redesign, radical process design from a clean slate, actually. But other examples exist. For instance, you can obtain automated and agile processes by using open standards like BPMN, the process modeling notation, in order to facilitate the integration of applications and communication across departments, but also across organizations. Or you can use process-aware information systems like a BPM system, so that business people can model, deploy, and optimize their process themselves without always the manual programming by software engineers. And the same applies to new technologies like social media, because many organizations already collect IDs, feedback, complaints in order to improve their processes or to create new processes in the domain of R&D or for production, a new supply chain, for instance. And then on the other hand, business processes can also support innovation in IT, new software, for instance. On your left, you see the rational unified process of IBM with the typical phases of a software development project. And in order for software to contribute to a business strategy, it must provide business-specific functionalities. So therefore, the business process and the requirements are a first phase in the framework of RUP. Then on the other side, you see the framework of SAGMA for enterprise architecture. And here are different artifacts that are categorized with different representations of the organization. For instance, in the rows, you see artifacts that explain why the organization operates, how it operates, by whom, and so on. And then the artifacts are also categorized according from in the rows from more abstract to more concrete. And as business processes explain how the organization operates, they also take a central role in that framework. But the examples until now, they do illustrate that both IT and business processes matter for digital innovation, but they are more limited to the traditional life cycle of a process, to the more technical aspects of modeling, deploying, and optimizing processes. And so does the mainstream literature in business process management, especially the studies that were conducted in the 90s. Some authors already included the management component by stipulating the importance of a process owner who is a manager of a specific process. But it was mostly technical oriented. As from the years 2000, more and more authors start recognizing the importance of the more non-technical aspects too. And meanwhile, those individual studies, they have been summarized in frameworks, like in a maturity model, but also other frameworks that exist. And those frameworks exist not only for digital innovations in general, but also for business processes in particular. So let's have a look at some illustrations to see how they include the non-technical aspects of business processes too. And in such frameworks, the different aspects of the process lifecycle, like modeling, deploying, and optimization, are called capabilities. Capabilities meaning critical success factors to reach process excellence, like skills, knowledge, and competences. So therefore, they are called capability frameworks too. The first illustration is a framework, a capability framework of SAP. And the different capabilities for digital innovation are shown on the slide. And you see that they explicitly recognize the importance of IT and business processes too. But they also include other aspects that are more non-technical, more a people focus. A focus on your customers, on effective knowledge workers. So this is more a people focus, more non-technical focus. They include, for instance, management by objectives, teamwork, coaches instead of managers, and so on. And they are also seen as important capabilities for having digital innovations. When we look at the capability framework for business processes, this is the framework of Roseman. It deals with capabilities for the whole process portfolio in the organization, so not for specific processes. And it also distinguishes methods and IT, which are the more technical parts, from other more non-technical parts. So they recognize, for instance, strategic alignment, governance, people, and culture. So here you have the explicit distinction between technical and non-technical aspects. This framework was used as an input for a maturity model that focuses on the whole process portfolio in the organization, and other maturity models exist, like Hammer and McCormack have done, and they also make a distinction between technical and non-technical capabilities. There are also maturity models that focus on specific business processes, like the well-known CMMI. So there are different types of maturities that exist. And what we did in our research, we collected all those maturity models, and we tried to summarize which capability areas they actually address, and whether they are technical or non-technical. So we did not create a maturity model of our own, we just summarized the capabilities. And that framework of ours is, relies on the traditional life cycle of a process and extended with organizational characteristics that relate to a process-oriented culture and structure. So here is where the pictures of my first slide reappear. They each represent a main capability area. So the framework has 6 main capability areas, each with sub-capabilities. And those main capabilities are rearranged in an upper layer and a lower layer, which are complementary, by the way. The lower layer is more the traditional life cycle. It's more the technical stuff, like I discussed earlier. And these are characteristics that should be present per business process, while the upper layer has more characteristics that apply to the whole process portfolio of an organization. And also the upper layer is predominantly with a non-technical focus. Why is it more technical in the lower layer? Because advanced modeling, deploying, and optimization of business processes is frequently IT enabled by means of methods and IT, for instance, in a BPM system, while the other more have a people focus. So let's have a close look at each of those three non-technical areas and how they relate to digital innovation. Well, first of all, we will look at process management, which is part of the process lifecycle. And the first element that you see is strategic alignment. Organizations, they innovate because they want to reach a business strategy with corporate goals. They don't innovate just to innovate. And as organizations have business processes that determine how they operate, it is also important that the goals of your business process are in line with that, with the corporate goals, so strategic alignment. In order to facilitate innovation, clear communication is essential. Communication and collaboration with external stakeholders like your customers, your suppliers, and so on. Also communication among the process participants and the process owners. So the external relationships must be taken into account, and the process participants and the owners must have clear roles and responsibilities. Because if they don't have clear roles and responsibilities, it will be difficult to reach the required goals. And of course, they must be trained to perform the required actions accordingly. And then the final element on the slide is daily management, like daily decision making, supervising an improvement plan, risk management, and so on. Then we go to process-oriented structure. Innovation can have an impact on your organization chart. When you have new processes, it can have an impact on your chart by means of new process owners, new supply chain, with a new supply chain manager, for instance, and new communication across the different departments. But looking at your organization chart can also reveal new lines of authority that are more efficient, more effective, leading to less bureaucracy, which can also stimulate innovation. And then governance bodies, you can have additional bodies. For instance, there can be many opportunities to innovate, but the organization cannot invest in all the opportunities that exist. So some organizations have a program manager to coordinate the different process owners, for instance, or an additional governance body can be a center of excellence, which is a competence center to methodologically support the process owners. For instance, they transfer knowledge on BPMN, on Lean, Six Sigma, project management, and so on. So these can be additional bodies for the structure. And then we move on to an example for process-oriented culture, because it's also important for the organization to have a mindset that is in favor of innovation. If you have a culture in the organization that is resistant to change, it will be less likely that the organization will also innovate. And with values that are process-oriented, for instance, I mean team spirit, empowerment, customer orientation, collaboration, and so on, in order to be open to innovation. And then process-oriented attitudes and behaviors can be a representation of those values. For instance, they can transfer knowledge, transfer success stories, transfer lessons learned across business processes, across innovation projects. Then we have appraisal and rewards. This is also very important to motivate your people. In most organizations, people are rewarded based on the vertical departments in the organization, but you can also reward your people when the processes in which they work increase in performance, for instance. So you can also have metrics that are related to the horizontal processes. And reward them as such. Not only it doesn't need a financial reward, also non-financially by having a dinner or an event together, for instance. But such a rewarding system requires top management support. And it's also good to have top managers who walk the talk, to see business process and innovation as a way of doing business. So these are some examples of capabilities in order to help innovate for organizations. So in conclusion, we can say that the technical aspects are, of course, quite important to innovate, but organizations should not forget about the non-technical aspects too. So they should always keep an eye on the management of their business processes, the culture and the structure in the organization too, in order to facilitate digital innovations. So we are now at the end of the presentation. I would like to thank you. There is also my website and the book of Springer Briefs if you would like to have more information about my framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy, for this inspiring talk, alluding to the importance of organizational issues, which I have experienced very strongly to be faced in practice. So I'm looking forward probably also to feedback, confirmation, discussions on the presentation from the audience. Any questions, comments? Yes, please.
Thank you for presentation. I have a question about the role of business process in enabling innovation. We have two kinds of innovation, which is disruptive or incremental. Mm-hmm. For incremental, for sure, business process can help. What's your idea about disruptive innovation?
About
disruptive innovation.
So more radical innovation. Yeah. Well, that's more related to the process reengineering I was talking about. Also, in that domain, you can have radical innovation of business process and afterwards some incremental. So actually, you should find or many organizations need both. Sometimes your business process need to have a lot of change in how they operate and so on. So many organizations, they have a balance between sometimes radical process redesign, sometimes radical process redesign, as claimed by, for instance, the PPR proponents did. So I think it's very important to have a whole vision on the long term and not only see it for the project-based radical innovation project. So on the long run, I think the vision of business process management is relevant, and sometimes those innovation projects can be more radical or more incremental as such.
Thank you very much. Further questions? So, yeah, Sanja.
So thanks for your presentation. And I was wondering about the separation between culture and the structure. As you pointed out, it is the values, right? But when I think about these examples of structure, I think that these are the visible parts of what the values reflect. So could you maybe shortly point out the reason?
So how I made the distinction between culture and structure, or?
What is the rationale for splitting? So what do you want to point at by seeing it as a separate?
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. Well, actually, when we looked at the maturity models, because this is a summary of what we found in maturity models, then many models were also relying on the organization chart, and therefore we found it quite important to have a more separate part for structure, because the culture can be seen as the more informal structure of the organization, or vice versa, that culture is a translation within a structure. So as many maturity models rely on center of excellences and organization charts, it was so predominant in the maturity models, we have decided to see it as a separate capability, main capability. But it can indeed be part of one big main area, the upper layer with different sub-capabilities. But we have decided to make it as a separate main area because it was so frequently present in the maturity models that we found.
Okay, so it's not the conceptualization of culture, it's rather that your analysis shows.
To stress it a little bit more, yes, okay. Yes. It can just be all sub-capabilities in the upper layer, let's say, yeah.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Sanja. Stin?
If we still have time.
Of course we do.
I basically have a comment to make. I think that Amy's approach is very mature in the sense that it adds two things to what we've seen today. That is, one, you're approaching innovation from a very holistic perspective. That is not just the modeling, not just the technology, but there's a whole lot of capabilities that are involved that together need to align to create a business model innovation or a process model innovation, etc. And two, for those of you who don't know Amy's work, I think one of the core contributions of her work, which is also related to innovation, is that she kind of claims and also proves in her work that there should be a contingency approach towards choosing a method for doing process management. So choosing the right method in the right moment is kind of also key for being able to innovate with BPM and technology.
Great. Thank you very much, Stin. Is there another question? No? If there's no further question, maybe one comment from my side. I get this just to stimulate some conversation, maybe a bit provocatively. I get this a lot that people would say, you need to have a holistic view and you need to embrace organizational things and so forth. Yes, but what does that ultimately mean? So can we go a bit further and beyond understanding that this is important? Is there any more meat to the bone in terms of what can you suggest then to organizations what to do in order to better consider, for instance, culture in business process management?
So some practical guidelines you mean to start from, or what are you aiming at?
Some sort of normative advice, I mean, for me it's kind of natural once you know this is important. Next step is, okay, how can I then manage this? Is there any tools? Is there any method? Is there any set of guidelines which could actually help or facilitate organizations to consider then the more non-technical or organizational issues? Have you looked into this, or is that rather future research agenda in your
Well,
work?
it's rather future research, but nevertheless, I think it is important that people in the organization are first convinced of the outcomes that BPM can bring to the organization before they actually jump into it. Before that there is an agreement, before you start. Because I have seen organizations, I also teach in a postgraduate course, and I see many people who say, well, we have BPM in the organization because someone has followed the course or read a book and now they want to do it in the organization, but people in the organization, they just don't care about the concept of BPM, it's just the idea of a single person. So I think there must be some consensus first of why you want to introduce BPM, what are the problems and how do you think BPM can solve those problems. So really see it in the context of some goals that you want to reach, and not do BPM because it's a fancy topic, for instance, but really because it can bring something to the organization. And top management, of course, is a very stimulating factor in that. Top management commitment, walk the talk, but just to convince everyone where do we want to go and see it in a kind of a business strategy, the problems that there are in the organization.
Thank you very much. Great. Warm thank you to Amy. So next speaker to the stage is Jan Recker. Professor Recker, good old friend of ours from QT, Brisbane in Australia. He has a number of positions. He's foremostly Woolworth Chair of Retail Innovation. And also he's Alexander von Humboldt Fellow. Last but not least, he's full professor for information systems at Queensland University of Technology. Jan is, I think, well known to quite a few of us. He has done substantive research in business process modeling, but also in business transformation management, in green information systems. He was leading the BPM group also at QT for quite a while, and he had a number of PhD students being very successful in this area, and he was definitely very instrumental for a number of path-leading research coming out of Brisbane, Australia, in IS in general, but also in BPM in specific. I'm very proud also and happy that Jan is also a close collaborator to our group, being a visiting professor at our institute. And we share a lot of thoughts and research in common. So I look very much to your presentation, which is about, who might guess it, deviance, and also in particular positive deviance. I very much look forward to your presentation. Jan, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jan. That's a very kind introduction. Welcome, everybody. I'm the sole representative of Australia here. I'm not sure whether you noticed, but I think in at least every second talk we had some reference to QT Australia, either in the content or the speaker. So that must mean that if Jörg is the point of departure for BPM, Europe is the destination for BPM, then we must be the stopover, yeah? The 40-hour, 20,000-kilometer stopover. Well, being one of the last speakers puts me in a good and a bad position. The bad position is you can't have any wine for lunch, unlike some of my colleagues here. And the good position is that we can circle back to some topics that were mentioned quite earlier. And I actually want to go back to topics that we discussed in the first two talks here mainly. The first one, the obvious one, is around deviance. And I want to give that positive spin to deviance and talk about how that might be an interesting area for BPM. And the other one is around what Will talked about, which was around big data, data science, and the ability to use evidence in management decisions. Now for me, as an empirical researcher, that's all I care about, yeah? So let me tell you two stories. One was 10 years ago when I was trying to study and get evidence for BPM adoption, and it took 2 years to get 21 interviews done. And in 2007, Michael Zumul and I, we wanted to see how models are really used by people, and we took a year to collect 100 models. Yeah, so this is not too long ago. I'm not that old, but it tells you a little bit about how hard it was to actually create evidence and facts for research, and how now with big data emerging, with digital innovation, giving us traceability and scalability, we have way more evidence, which is a haven for us as researchers. But incredibly and increasingly, it's also important to organization for the notion of evidence-based management. Now, evidence-based management isn't new, and we see it in medicine and in other fields as well. It's basically the idea, let's replace the status and the confidence of the speaker at a stage with hard facts. Yeah, and so that's the idea. And it sounds seemingly simple, but if you think about it, if you go and see how a lot of BPM decisions are being made, how many of them are truly evidence-based? Yeah, so if we step outside process mining technology and other things that actually yield great facts, a lot of the BPM that I see in the real world, if I would put it positively, I would say they're based on heuristics. If I would put it a little bit more sharply, I would say that's a lot of guesswork, a lot of bias, a lot of, I think we should be doing X. Yeah, I think we should model it this way. Our model is in 70% approximation of a sunny side picture in the first place. I have a 2x2 matrix that tells me how to analyze my process. I have a nice a fishbone diagram that tells me where the issues are, and this is my great idea for improvement. So there's really not a lot of evidence there. So some of the things that we've been doing over recent years, increasingly work with organizations with a view to try, well, how can we insert more evidence into BPM? From a very non-technical perspective, because we believe that opens up new ways to think about process management, or in our case, about process innovation. And the topic that I want to talk about is an example of how you can use evidence to think about process improvement in quite a different way. And that's this notion of positive deviance. Now, positive deviance is a way where you go through the evidence about your process and you try to find the ones that are not working badly or deviating in a negative sort of way, but you think, who's doing things differently and is incredibly successful with that? Yeah? And you may have seen in the beginning, my title slide had this beautiful pair of hands that were kneading dough. Well, in my hands, unfortunately, it wasn't also my dough. But that's a picture of some bakers in bakeries, because the example I wanted to give you is how we can study bakery processes and look for positive deviance and use that for process improvement as an example. Now, a lot of people think, bakery process, that's not technical. There's not a lot of data trails from what bakers do. They don't enter that in some sort of system. But if you think about it, it's a very, very good process. It's highly standardized. Yeah, recipes, materials, products. Can't make a green sourdough. Yeah, can't make a baguette with sprinkles on top. So it's highly standardized in what people do and what sort of outcomes they generate. But still, if you go to any bakery, it could be, the bread could be better or worse. Or if you have bakeries where we studied this in supermarkets, They could be better or worse. They could be performing way better or way differently. In the case of Woolworths, this Australian supermarket chain, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of the difference in a good bakery and a bad bakery. So there's something to it. So process deviance is now the question of where do we have innovation and success already happening in our pool of processes within our company? And can't we use that to improve all other processes? That's the basic idea behind it. And as I said, the example that I'm using here is around bakery processes. Now, what is the difference? We have a slightly different definition of deviance from let's say, Marlon's definition. We have a stricter one. So normally if you would say, well, we have process instances, so number of times this process runs, when we have some sort of performance metric. In bakeries, that could be how good the bread is, or simpler put, how many bread rolls you sell. Yeah? And then you would have normally some sort of normally distributed curve of performance. Some do it better, some do it worse, most of them in some sort of band of average. Now what we normally do in process improvement is we look at the bad eggs and try to improve them. Yeah? So we look typically at something that we would call negative deviance. Everyone that's just not up to scratch, not up to standard, and then we see what we can implement, how we can change the process to make these people better. Positive deviance now spins this around and say, well, let's look at these ones, because apparently whatever it is that they're doing is much, much better than what everybody else is doing, not just a little bit more or less than the average. So what we define positive deviance is someone that stands out of all other processes that are comparable, as it shows better performance, and this is the interesting bit, under the same environmental conditions. So positive deviance is not you just performing better than everybody else, is you performing better than everybody else whilst everybody's on the same playing field. Yeah, put that into perspective. Usain Bolt is a pretty fast runner, but he's not a positive deviant. He doesn't run differently from everybody else. He doesn't train differently. And I haven't heard any drugs allegations that have been proven true, so we can assume he's doing the same things. He's just better. Yeah? So that could also be, let me put that into the context of bakeries. One very simple factor for why you might sell more bread rolls is you have more customers come into your store. In Europe, that's one thing. In Australia, the contrasts are very stark, very strong. For example, if you have a bakery downtown Sydney, 6 million people, you sell more bread rolls than in my favorite store, which is in Weipa. Weipa is at the north end of Queensland, a state that's 6 times the size of Germany. There's 40 people living there, and it doesn't have a road. It is only accessible by boat, both for the customers and the suppliers. So naturally, you see a lot less bread rolls being sold in that bakery over there. Now, if you plot this a little bit, yeah, let's say we have customer penetration on the x-axis, and you have sales performance, how many bread rolls you sell, and they look across all your bakery stores. We had pretty much exactly 1,000. You would see this sort of band. That is the process performance that is sort of normal given some of these influences like customer penetration or store size or how many bakers you have. All these normal factors that would account for this. Now, and you can see these two diagonal lines that give you a 99% confidence interval. So 99% of all the bakeries fall within these bands, and they would be normal. A little better, a little bit worse, but overall they perform exactly as you would expect given the number of customers, the number of competing bakeries in the vicinity, these sorts of things. Now the positive deviants are now the ones that stand outside of that on the upper angle. So I marked them blue here. So these are actually deviant. They should sell less bread rolls given how many customers they have, given how many competition they have, given how trained their staff are, etc. and so forth. You can have a number of these sorts of slides. So what we typically do is, this is one side of a multi-dimensional cube, and you work out who's truly deviant, who performs better than everybody else under the same conditions. Now, what we have now, a different approach would be deviance mining. We know that they're different. We know that they're doing something different and it yields different output. We don't know why. We don't know what they're doing and how. So being an empirical researcher, the only way that I could come up with answering this question, why they're deviant, is we go out and study them, which in the bakery case means you put on a cap, you get up at night, and you start baking with the bakery people. So we've done this. Fortunately, I had a little bit of help with some of my students who came along and went to at night and started observing the bakery processes, which unfortunately started at 2 a.m. in the morning, so that at 7 o'clock the bread rolls are fresh. And you obviously do this for a lot of the cases. You study the positive deviance cases, you study the normal cases so you can compare these, and then in the end you actually get root causes out of this. You can compare this and you find out this is what everybody else is doing. This is what the positive deviants are doing. This is how they're different. And that's important because you can't just simply go and say, hi, my friend, you're a very good baker. What are you doing differently? No one knows this, yeah? So one of the typical facets in deviance is that people do not necessarily know that they're deviant. They're just doing their work, yeah? They're just executing whatever their processes are. We sometimes call this unconscious competence. You're really good, but you don't know that, yeah? You lack the reference to a comparison. What actually happens, so when we go into these stores and we try to ascertain what they're doing, in the end we tell them it's because you are under the top 5 bakeries in the whole of the country. You see the chest swell and the pride coming in, and then they start talking and giving you lots of reasons why they're different. So you can't do that in the beginning either. Anyway, so lots of factors obviously could pertain. It's a bit of a mathematical challenge to later work out what is a true root cause. I'm not going to bore you with the details. But some of the interesting findings that you can generate through this sort of way of thinking about it is, typically it's not the process. Yeah? Typically everybody follows the same process. So in the bakery example, it's not that they're making bread rolls or sourdough with different ingredients or in a different baking procedure. So that can't be it. Typically it's also not the competition or the context in which you do, because you filtered that out in the beginning, right? What it is, it's very often down to individual orientations of the people, so some sort of cultural aspect, service orientation of the people, motivation, willingness to do something extra. So we had people that knowingly and consciously deviated from, say, baking schedules. Instead of going 2 a.m., they actually started baking at 9 a.m. because the key customers came in at 4 p.m. And so they didn't have the stale bread rolls, they had the fresh bread rolls, these sorts of things. And that opens up a whole lot of interesting collaboration, communication, culture was an interesting thing. Creativity and intention to deviate was another one. That's a very interesting point in this whole deviance notion. Typically, it's very strongly linked to an intention. I want to be different. I want to do something different. It just doesn't happen by chance. Also gives a lot of interesting challenges for researchers in this area, because positive deviance can be very good. I'll show you an example of what sort of impact that generates in a second. But obviously you don't want deviance in all situations. You don't want it in mission-critical situations and health-critical processes or in very strong compliance or regulated environments. Yeah? You don't want people to not use gloves when they prepare food for customers, because it could spread illnesses and so forth. But the question is really, where do you want to allow for deviance to occur and where do you not allow it to occur? Now in a BPM context, a very interesting difference in how we normally think about process improvement is in this. When we do normally process improvement and try to find key issues and the root cause of these issues and fix them, we typically fix the bottom half. Yeah, let's say the 10% that are lower than the average, that's the dotted line in this case, and try to improve them and bring it to the average level. This sort of idea of using positive deviance and learning from the very, very best gives you an opportunity to then make the deviance process the new as is process. Yeah? And thereby you improve 90% or 95% of your organization. So the other beauty of this approach is you have positive deviance basically in all situations where you have a large number of process cases, yeah, and a large volume of these cases, and very, very often in standardized processes, yeah, where actually technically the process should always be done the same way, but because lots of people are involved, there will be deviance. Yeah? So for example, we've done this in the bakeries. We looked at managers of stores. We looked at, not at the students at universities, we looked at the teachers of universities in high schools and see not who's learning better, but who's teaching better than everybody else, and why is that? You see this a lot also in franchise organizations with lots of subsidiaries. Yeah, so we're working with McDonald's, Pizza, Caper, Subway in the moment, where you have very, very strict standardized processes, but incredible competition. So every franchisee has a need to produce the same Subway sandwich or the same Big Mac, but wants to be better than the competition. So you typically find positive deviance everywhere, and it's just a very different way of using evidence to do process improvement without looking outside, just by looking inside and giving everybody up to the same level. So, evidence-based decisions, that is just one example. Overall, I think the trend is that in the BPM field and research practice, we can't go back and either sell something based on 20 interviews with stakeholders or with some sketchy data. In the area where evidence is basically everywhere, we need to put that into our decision-making context. Well, I haven't really talked about this. But one of the good things that we bring as researchers into organization is that we're pretty good in this sort of data science, or lots of us anyway, that we can work with data and create evidence that organizations can use. And positive deviance is an interesting approach that's coming up as a way to innovate from within rather than from the outside. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan, for your presentation. Very insightful and inspiring, I find, and following up nicely on the discussions we had earlier. Comments? Yes, please. Hayo.
Jan, thank you for your casual talk and very inspiring as well. I had a question about exploiting these positive deviants perhaps in another context. I think it makes perfect sense what you suggest, and it is actually very applicable when you talk about people who are doing the same things, exactly the same things, have to share the same context. In the Netherlands, we are working in a project where we are looking at processes across different organizations where they basically produce the same products or services, but they all do this in slightly different ways. And there, of course, also the concept of positive deviance would be very effective and helpful. But there you have the problem that people have slightly different contexts, different setups, different objectives perhaps. What are your thoughts on also in these contexts where people do not exactly do the same things, exploiting this concept of positive deviance?
Well, there's two ways to this. One of the challenges that we're dealing with at the moment is to define what the norm actually is. What is the normal process? What is that actually, right? So it could be very highly structured, highly formalized, like an implemented workflow where the system tells you what to do. And if you deviate, that's very obvious. You can spot that all the more. Not all processes are like this. Some processes have sketchy sort of structural norms, like a checklist, yeah, like a set of rules that you follow. Some of them are very emergent, and they're basically only the way we do things around here. They might not even be formalized or expressed. So then finding positive deviance, something that deviates from that, is really problematic. And I'm not sure how to do this yet. I skipped a lot about the mathematics in the beginning, working out all these context factors and then ruling out that that's not it. That's basically a lot of legwork where you build a huge model with all the potential variables, scan for all the variables, get data on them, and then normalize and rule them out. Yeah, and so that becomes an incredibly data-intensive and math-intensive exercise to rule these factors out. The only way that we thought about doing this in the beginning is literally scan the environment, talk to lots of people. What would be the normal root causes for performance? What does everybody believe will cause a process to be better or different? Yeah, and then working out whether or not that is actually a deviance root cause or a factor that we should control for. Yeah. So in that 1 2x2 slides, as I said, is basically an n-dimensional cube. And the true deviance is the one that stands out in each of these dimensions, which basically means whenever you have thousands of instances, you will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 deviants, but not more than that. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, you go first.
Many thanks for the nice presentation. My question is about capturing knowledge. If there is a positive deviation, how you can make sure that you capture knowledge and then reflect it on business processes?
It's a very good question, yeah. So the sort of approach of identifying the deviance and maybe even working on what the root cause of the deviance is. Very often you notice, as I mentioned, that people don't actually have knowledge that they deviate, or you don't have that. So then the question is a knowledge management question, a knowledge transfer question. What we found works very well is that you make people aware of their deviance, so they start reasoning themselves about why and how they do the things that they do, and later you bring everybody else into this environment. So we bring the good teachers upstage and they give teaching seminars. We brought all the normal bakers into the positive deviance bakeries so they can see the positive deviant work and see what they do differently. Because most often these people don't know themselves. But you know, in terms of very strict, precise findings, they don't have them yet.
Thank you very much. Will?
So thanks, Jan, for a very nice talk. It relates very much to things that we are also interested in, the cross-organizational mining in the context of the Kozlog project, where we are benchmarking municipalities with respect to each other. but also in the notion of what we call process cubes, where we use OLAP type of things related to that. So if I go to the Kozelog project, it was only possible to do that because municipalities are not competing with one another. So that's why we could find many municipalities that would like to learn from each other. There we see that having 10 municipalities is too small. And in statistical evidence type of thing, we get too low. Your Woolworths example is beautiful because you have many points and they are all at an aggregate level. But how many situations can one actually find where you can compare many variants of the same process in a kind of non-competitive way?
Well, it's a good point. We find that at the moment the concept has so much attraction, especially to industry, because it yields great power to improve your businesses without doing actually much, right? So Woolworth, I should have mentioned this example. What process performance increment means. 4 bread rolls equals $1 million in a large retailer. Yeah. So if you sell 4 more bread rolls, it's $1 million revenue. So the whole project generated, I don't even know. So that's the beauty and that's the allure for a lot of organizations, and we find that it typically go a long way of making the data available to you. So I mentioned very briefly Red Cross blood donors. They consider positive deviants the people that come back and donate blood very often, because 99% of people go and donate blood, either not at all or just once and never come back. So, and they give you all the data available, but that's not all, because then you have the actual donors and you don't have data on them available. So it's a challenge, but you would expect that, especially if you have digital traces of process, that challenge will just eradicate itself. The more footprints of their process data we have, the easier it will be to spot the deviants.
So that's also kind of funny question related to bread. So you're German. I've had bread from Woolworths.
Yeah, I know.
Why is German bread so much better than the bread?
The most serious question I've been asked over the last 3 years is, why isn't the bread better? So I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Yeah, false positives.
Because when you talk about blood donations, you have one problem that at least in Germany you get like 20 or 30 euros for a blood donation, and this might encourage people or poor people to donate blood more often, and maybe you don't want them in your whole process because maybe their blood is maybe not that good. I don't know.
Yep, it's true. So what you normally would do, what we try to do, we try to get rid of these type 2 errors by in the end cross-validating that the positive deviants that we identified with all the reasons why they're deviant, that doesn't lead, just they have a different sort of effect. So they're doing all the things that the deviants are doing, but they're not deviant anymore. So typically you do this by comparing all your behavioral data with some factual data about the performance. Yeah. So there's ways to dealing with this. With large numbers, you typically have a problem with that. Yeah. You typically have more type 2 errors, false positives than the other way around. But in this case, it might be a good thing. And the bad thing could be that you miss a deviance that you should have spotted.
Thanks.
Cheers.
There you go.
Very interesting talk and very interesting topic. Now, looking to the reasons you have shown for positive deviation, look very much like also people-related and culture-related. So how do you see this, and how much can you really transfer via processes then into the organization?
I think that's a function maybe of the process scenarios in which we studied them. Yeah, so the bakery process is an example where you have highly skilled people. Yeah, so people that actually go through a trade apprenticeship and they become baker, and then these bakers get into this in the scenario and they get a checklist for how to make a bread roll. You would expect that after 5 years they actually know this. So they have that tendency to deviate, and they have a lot of personal motivational reasons for this. Now, I would expect in different domains, yeah, say in production, etc. I think the reason could be very different, where say the deviance could actually stem from people doing very different things, which you don't have in these sorts of processes. Yeah, so that might be a bit skew in the context that we looked at so far.
But also I think when Jan says process, he doesn't only necessarily means the standardized process to be rolled out and described somewhere, but he would definitely include
also
kind of
informal
practices,
work
routines,
practices and so
informal
forth,
practices. Yeah. So kind of culture in your sense might be embedded in also the concept of process Jan was referring to.
I was just referring to, because we also made this experience in our company, that standardizing too much can even endanger innovation. And we now very much go into the direction to go to more entrepreneurial behavior. So really to enable the people to also take this kind of deviations from defined processes. I mean, I think we are not yet there to really then identify which ones are the good ones. I mean, in certain areas we do that, especially in the sales domains. We try to transfer this good knowledge, but it's very much also what we try to do this via culture. So really encourage the people to do it. And not
You're absolutely spot on. I think that the interesting of that for BPM, maybe for a research perspective, is it's a way to identify where the limits are, yeah, of how much you would standardize or you should standardize. And then from the other perspective, positive deviance, as I said, you don't want to encourage deviance everywhere. Yeah? There's good places where you don't want that.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you
Thanks very much.
For the comments, questions? If that's not the case, then warm thank you, applause to Jan. Thank you very much. Peter, it's your turn. I'm very happy to welcome Peter Trückmann as already the last speaker here in our session before we kick off the panel presentation. We're working with Peter for quite a while already. He visited us last year, also on an inspiring workshop we had here on business process management. Peter is from the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia. Peter is an associate professor at the Faculty of Economics at this particular university. His research interests include business process models and on the various aspects of business process management, supply chain management, and operations management. He has published a number of well-cited articles. He has won a number of prizes for his research, and he's a well-considered and established scholar in the field of business process management. I'm very proud we have you here. And he will talk about another very important topic, which is very much, I think, on the agenda, both in research and practice, which we haven't talked much about today, which is social media and social networks. And I very much like also the title, let's push it beyond a marketing hype, or let's see what it can really bring to the table of business process management. Peter, we all look very much forward to your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. It's always difficult to go after Jan Recker, who is always an excellent presenter, but I'll try to actually relate somewhat to his positive deviance, also in his research. What I will try to do today is to present some of our recent work on social media and BPM and the potential of connecting those two fields. The work that we are doing together with Monica Kloon, who is also here in the audience, just in the middle of the audience. And in fact, it's very likely that we will, in the next months, contact some of you to participate in our Delphi study that we are planning to actually take our research further. The reason why we have chosen that topic is that obviously social media is nowadays in a very high phase of its introduction. I have here a nice quote. It's actually a paraphrase of the quote for, I think, sustainable development or something like that. That nowadays everybody is actually talking about that, but nobody really knows how to do it. And what we are trying to investigate in our research is not what is obviously the general purpose of social media in marketing, public relations, and topics like that, but whether and what is the real value of, or can be the real value of social media for our field, for business process management. And to basically start where Jan has left off, I think that one of the very important ideas or possibilities of social media can be for employees to let them share their positive deviance behavior. Or, well, if not that, at least let them share their behavior, let them share their opinions, and well, we'll see whether they are positively deviant or not. And obviously the advantage of social media is that it's very easy to contribute. In many of our consulting projects, we've seen employees, working in the production, working in customer support, who were very positively deviant, who also saw many of the problems in the processes. but they would never ever write an email or a report and send that to their process owner or, I don't know, chief executive officer, because they would just not feel comfortable with that. They may, however, be comfortable with writing a comment on Yammer or Wiki or whatever a company will be using internally. Even more so, of course, because nowadays everybody is familiar with social networks, so introducing Yammer in a company will not demand learning new software tools by the employees. Most of the employees I know, they are not too enthusiastic about learning the use of new IT tools. Even I'm the same, I have still not learned how to use the new fancy video conference facility that we have at our faculty. So that's why I'm here. Okay, kidding. And also I think the other important thing is that, of course, we all know that nowadays innovation happens globally. Innovation also don't happen no longer just within one company, but within digital ecosystems, as Michael nicely said, or supply chains, or supply networks, or knowledge networks, or however you want to call that. And of course that social media allows to extend the reach both within the company and also with other partners, either suppliers, customers, software vendors, you name it, you have it. Of course, there are several problems connected to social media, several reasons why many companies still stay in the hype phase. Definitely, the lack of responsiveness is a potential problem. I've read some paper that, for example, on Wikipedia, 0.1% of participants are actually active contributors. If you have a company of 1,000 employees using I don't know, the internal wiki, that means that you will have one active contributor, which of course kind of won't work, right? And also what I've often found when talking to people in organizations is that those social networks are very easy to ignore. For example, I've talked with an expert in research and development in a large pharmaceutical company. They have introduced Yammer for supporting their knowledge-intensive processes, and his comment was something like that yeah, those social networks are great. Every week or so I get an email that I have 5 new friends, but otherwise they don't bother me while I'm doing my work, and if I need anything I go to a person and ask him in person or by phone. So this kind of a benevolent ignorance is a potential problem. Of course, another problem may be that, first of all, especially as you'll see, we are also investigating the use of social media in business to business, as the fact that companies may need to protect their knowledge from their potential competitors. Or that, of course, they may even protect their internal knowledge. For example, I was presenting a previous paper on the use of wikis in one similar conference in the US. And then after my presentation, I was approached by the chief information officer of one of the large automotive producer in the States and in Europe. And he said that there is no way they could use something like that because, somebody may comment, okay, we have a problem with that brakes or something like that. And that comment on the internal social network of the organization, that very informal comment, could then be seized by the court and used in court procedures against the company. So they need to be very careful as to what trace their work potentially leaves. And another thing that we have often found is that for social media, unless they have a very clearly defined purpose, it's very possible that over time this will actually dilute. We were doing, for example, a case study for a company that implemented Wiki as a kind of an internal knowledge management system. And then apparently the view of the manager, the view of middle managers, and the view of employees actually using it on what the purpose of that wiki is were completely different. And on a similar, even more dramatic note, I once read the case of a company then using internal social networks for sexual harassment within the company. So again, a potentially problematic issue. But regardless of those problems, Of course, what we do still believe is that it is possible to use social media, and what we are and will be investigating is the use of social media in various phases of the business process lifecycle. And what we are kind of proposing, and of course we will be more than happy to receive any feedback on this, is to proposing a conceptual framework that could be used to investigate and to identify various ways in which social media can be used in business process life cycles. And in doing so, we have, by the way, we have been struggling a bit with how to name the phases and which of the several business process life cycles and business process management life cycles that exist to use in our work. At the end, we went for the kind of a simplest possible example with 4 phases: modeling, executing, monitoring, and improving the business processes. And the other dimension in the proposed conceptual framework is whether it involves only internal participants, the participants from within the company, or whether you also want to bring in your suppliers, customers, vendors, whatever you want. And here, and also in our paper, but if anyone is interested, of course, I can also send the whole paper, we have tried to identify some of the main ways in which social media can be used. In the modeling phase, and I think this is actually both applicable if you do the model the classic way, you know, by interviewing employees, or if you do some process mining. I think that the main issue that can be, well, at least partly solved, is to include more employees in the modeling. Because what I have often noticed in our consulting projects is that, of course, in large organizations, only a few selected individuals can be involved in a process modeling and improvement project. Even more, usually, at least in my experience, those employees are those that are most in favor of that whole BPM thing. And then when those changes should actually be implemented, the employees who were not involved may very well be against it. We also wrote a recent case study on that, where we basically argued that also that, you know, the question that was previously the difference between radical and incremental improvement is very much in the eyes of the beholder. It very much depends on the absorptive capacity of employees. And in one of our cases, really incremental changes suggested by the process improvement team were perceived as radical by those employees who were actually not aware what's going on. And definitely the various ways in which social media can be used to involve more employees in an organization can then improve their interest in also making the changes. And about the execution phase, I think that's also very interesting to relate to Jan's work. You know, there are the positively deviant people who are deviant in the execution of their business processes. Allow them to share their deviant behavior with others and allow them to tell others why and how they are actually behaving deviantly. Of course, whether they will be willing, able, or empowered to do so is another question for which I will need much more than 5 minutes. Of course, the idea of monitoring and the social media is that you can always share those results. For example, going back to Wolfsburg case again, if they have an internal Yammer or whatever, sharing the results of the work that the researchers on QET would do with all of the employees and allowing them to actually comment on them, allowing them maybe even to complain on the results if they are one of those non-performing or negatively deviant, companies maybe, you know, kind of create that positive competition among the bakeries to actually improve and become more positively deviant. And of course, again, for the improvement phase, I think it really poses again several ideas in which also not just to improve things, but also then to gather the data of how much the things have been improved, and also to kind of increase the ability or the willingness of individuals to actually work in a new way. Once again, this is just a brief summary. I've referred mostly to the use of most of the examples refer to the use of social media within one organization, but several of them actually can be used for various stakeholders. For example, we're also discussing the idea of customer process management. Remember that airport example, where basically the whole process was modeled or presented from a customer perspective, so how customer actually perceives the process at the airport. And of course, in most cases, we are either guessing or mining the data to get that customer perspective on business process. But you could, of course, also use social media to involve customers, to tell them, to have them tell you how they perceive your process and what is actually your process. Basically, what was kind of the starting motivation for our paper and my talk was that issue that we were discussing a lot also with Monica, and I think that almost every presentation of today had kind of as one of the main topics is how on one hand, of course, to bridge the gap between the well-structured, optimized, standardized processes, because you have to have those processes being performed in a kind of a standardized way, because your customers probably expect that. The customer of bakery definitely expects more or less the same processes and the same products, regardless of which bakery in Australia he or she gets into. But on the other hand, of course, first of all, the environment in a digital world is changing quickly. That is basically every of our masters and PhD thesis starts with the first sentence is always, we live in a quickly changing environment. And of course, how for business processes to respond to those is definitely a challenge. And social media, by being a real-time feedback opportunity for companies, can definitely help in that respect. And of course, by providing the flexibility, by enabling also to include more employees and more of the other stakeholders in that whole BPM project. Not to have that as just a small group of people. We also kind of joke that we have a similar BPM event in Ljubljana, and usually, the people that come there to that event are those that are most in favor of BPM, but you never get to talk to those people who are actually against BPM. And in terms of the framework, of course, we probably have posed more questions that provided answers. I think that I'm very much in favor of frameworks like that. I've suggested several of them for various fields myself in the previous years. The idea, I think, is that when you start to use social media, or when you are using social media, and you say, okay, I want to do more than just use them for marketing, you can say, okay, what I will, for example, do, I will use them for process monitoring, but just for internal participants. So let's say that I'm the dean of the faculty of economics. I may decide that I will share the results of the students' evaluation service on our internal Yammer site. Or if I'm more radical, I may decide that I will also involve the external participants and allow those results to be shared with our students as well, and also, of course, allow them to comment on the results. Although if I were the dean and if I would suggest something like that, I think my colleagues would take me out of the room, so, but that's another story. Okay, I think I have like 15 seconds left, so that is from my side. Of course, any questions, most welcome. Any suggestions as well, because me and Monica will work on that for a few more years, as mentioned. Well, that will be part of her PhD thesis eventually as well. As mentioned, we also plan to contact several of you for the participation in the Delphi study, which we will start probably this year. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your presentation and insights into this exciting, important topic. I guess that gives some foundation also for our discussions, added a very nice, important facet, as I find. Jan, would you like to make the start?
Yeah, thank you. I want to answer to your call, so throwing in some ideas. So one thing that we were discussing with Jan was essentially when you look at the improvement processes, I think it makes a lot of sense to distinguish internal and external, and I think there is actually a lot of potential for using social media. So on the one hand side, supporting continuous improvement processes inside the company, but on the other hand, thinking of taking open innovation towards an open process innovation. And one of the companies that we were discussing over is exactly McDonald's, that also Jan mentioned. They're very good in being, on the one hand, very standardized, but on the other hand, stimulating their various stakeholders, employees, customers, to think of what they could wish for. And they have standardized processes then to tease this out and to leverage that into new product innovations, but also new process innovations. So I think for the improvement side, that may be really a good lever to discuss social media.
Yeah, thanks very much. That's a very good comment. I think that Starbucks is also doing something similar where people could actually propose new products, vote on them. But of course, that's always the question me and Monica were discussing a lot about is, of course, how to differentiate between true process innovation and marketing. That's, I think, an interesting idea, very interesting idea by you, but definitely a topic to further discuss.
Jan Reker?
That's an interesting case, Starbucks. Yeah. So when they launched this sort of open process innovation platform, it's not necessarily social media, more like crowdsourcing, I guess. But anyway, so it created more problems that it solved them. Yeah. So and that's something when you use social media for process improvement, a lot of organizations face that. Scale of responses, quality of responses, and then all the additional activity you have to look for. Yeah, all of a sudden you have to filter 150,000 ideas and make sense of them. You have to respond to all of them, etc. So the question is really whether that actually is good in the end. You get more of the same. You get responses you would have got anyway. Is it truly something innovative in there? Or whether you're actually shooting yourself in the foot. I know that Starbucks had to hire full-time employees that all they do is read all through all these ideas and try to filter them. I mean, I'm not sure whether that's the way to go for process improvement with social media.
Yeah, that's a very good comment. I've read a similar case when they had a similar experience even within the company. When they were just involving employees, they got like 600 ideas. And of course, they could not properly handle each of them. And the one that was in charge of that project said that it was a worse experience in the company because then everybody was unsatisfied. Yeah. So I guess that one takeaway is that then you need a very clearly defined process on how to actually handle the process improvement, I think. But yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Great topic. Maybe also a question or a suggestion. One of your critiques was that social media is often used like, yes, you're my friend, and then I won't bother you anymore. Now the definition of social media is that it's interactive rather than one-way directed communication, let's say. So if you would like to focus, I suggest that you filter out everything that was possible with an intranet, for example, where it says monitoring processes. There's probably no difference in sharing it via Yammer than sharing it via a classical internet, for example. So where it could really make a difference as opposed to what we already had.
Yeah, that's a very good comment. Yeah, thanks. Well, of course, the advantage of social media for monitoring may be that people may then, for example, you could somehow initiate a two-way communication. I think that, for example, to refer to again to Jan Reker's talk, by asking actually employees and try to identify whether that positive deviance or negative deviance cases have some contextual variables that were maybe not included in the study. Let them talk, let them discuss the differences in performance and the reasons for that differences. Yeah. But yeah, otherwise I agree with you, yeah, definitely.
Thank you very much. Further comments, questions? Yes, Will, please.
So one of the powers of social media is that it is for free. So it's for free, and it is for free in two senses. Everybody can engage, but it's not absolutely necessary. People only do it when they feel like it. And it is perceived that something is for free. There is software, and that's all you need. Now, if you take this to a business setting and you think about this freeness, then that can have negative aspects. So the first thing is, if you're in a company and people start spending substantial amount of time on doing things with social media, I think you should somehow include the costs. It is not for free. It's the same as that people think meetings are a waste of time, but at least they are officially and visible. But this is like an unofficial kind of area where people spend time on. That's one negative aspect of the freeness. I think another negative aspect of the freeness is the fact that the participation of people will be incredibly skewed. So there will be particular types of people that will engage heavily. The one person that would otherwise write a Wikipedia page or something like that. Some people will be very well represented, other people will not be represented. Where in many of the other things, it's more balanced, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, both. I totally agree with both. Just to maybe a few further comments. Yeah, I've once heard a business process management consultant who said that a company has to pay at least 100,000 euros for the project, otherwise they won't take it seriously. So if they get some free consulting, they will not really engage with top management support and everything because it's for free. And yeah, also I think that in terms of participation and cost of working, yeah, it's often the problem of either not including that or, for example, in one case, and there was actually a comment by a colleague of mine who was fresh from our faculty, started to work for a software development company, and his boss said to him, yeah, we have here internal knowledge base, write as much things that you observe there. And then, of course, since he was very young and enthusiastic, he spent quite a lot of time on that. But then after 3 months, his boss said to him, what are you doing? Look at how much time you spent on doing that. We cannot build that to our clients, so stop doing that. So again, I think we have probably also an issue between nominal and real management support for using them.
Yeah, thank you very much. Further questions, comments? Yes, please.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, and I totally agree with the usefulness of social networks. But I want to ask you, do you think that companies has a way to assess the reliability and the trust of social network data, especially in the case of external use? And then a comment for you is that there is an increasing phenomenon, for example, in the US, that they are using social network in health and in particular for the education of patients and also for clinical trials. So maybe this is another use for social network apart marketing.
What, what was the last clinical trials or?
Yeah, exactly.
How do they use that in clinical
because
trials?
They used to select patients. There is a particular kind of social network that is health social networks. And for example, a patient like me, and they used to select people because in that social network they can talk about drugs, for example, that they are taking for their disease. And pharmaceutical companies have control of this phenomena. And in that way they can contact patients and they ask them for clinical trials.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So an interesting idea, yeah. Also to kind of profile your customers, yeah, or your test subjects. Okay. Yeah.
And what about the reliability?
The reliability. Oh, that's a very good comment as well. Yeah. I guess that should be the fact that the comments or the content on social media can never be 100% reliable, should be taken into account. Because I think that if you want to assure a total reliability, like you want to assure in an SAP system or in any kind of an normal information system, then you would lose all of that flexibility, creativity, and everything that is connected to social media. So going back to that positive deviance example, I think you should also allow employees to talk about their positively deviant actions, although they may in fact turn out that they are not. So you should allow employees to share non-reliable data and then eventually, of course, investigate or identify whether or not you should make those practices a common practice or not.
Thank you very much, Peter. Jörg?
My question relates a little bit to Will's question. Social media is not only free, but social media does not have any hierarchy.
Yeah.
So people talk to each other and not to the middle management and the middle management to the higher management and the higher management to the top management. They just talk to each other. How can you assure that management gets something fruitful out of the discussion among all?
Interesting.
Ooh, very good question. How to assure value. Write that down. To be honest, I have not yet thought of that. But that's definitely something that we should investigate it a bit more.
First thoughts coming, like you could have groups, of course. Yeah, maybe a top management group, and for different areas you would have cycles of people talking to each other.
Yeah, of course you can organize it.
To organize it a little bit, that's possible. And then you could do some mining. Could do some text mining, Latin semantic analysis, looking what people are talking about, and then presenting very kind of aggregated results. That could be something.
Yeah.
Maybe our big data analytics group here could look into this. That's interesting. Yeah, Michael?
I know that there was some work done on managerial responses to social media, where we have a couple of different cases that are kind of very interesting. There was a video on YouTube of somebody that put some snore on the pizza at the Pizza Domino case, and it had 1 million subscribers within 1 hour. And the question was, how would then the management of Domino Pizza react to that kind of situation? Yeah. I also know this Delta Airlines. I think it was Delta Airlines breaking a guitar.
United.
United Airlines,
breaks guitars, yeah.
And how that reaction was. And I think there's another example also where the management really do not know how to respond. Should we allow? I think we use IKEA or something like that. Should we allow the employees to actually do Facebook or not? And some management think that that's a good thing because you're out in the right channels. Yeah. And other management think that this is really bad because it's what you should do privately. Yeah. So here we have a lot of interesting issue for the future of employees being.
I mean, definitely worth researching. Yeah? Kind of total cost of ownership of such systems. In terms of distraction also is amazing, of course.
That's actually, sorry, just to relate to that, United breaks guitars.
You want to get something done, you better turn it off, really.
That's actually the movie I'm showing to my business students, and then I tell them, okay, I give them statistics. I think 400,000 pieces of luggage are actually destroyed or damaged every year by the airline, and then you have here one case that apparently brought millions and millions of dollars of damage in bad reputation because it was such a famous movie. What will you do about it? How will you handle such complaints now that one angry customer can cause you so much damage?
Last time, Mikael.
I can't help it. There's a impact factor that I know now that telephone systems are used in America. So if you have a very strong impact factor, you will be prioritized in the telephone line. Do you see the point of that? So if I have a very strong Twitter factor, for example, with very many followers, I would be prioritized so that if I would get mad, if I'm having too long waiting time, that would be
so
bad for the company, so I would be prioritized.
Okay, but your impact factor in relation to this specific company, right? Because you are
No,
kind of tweeting on your
impact factor
in general.
Yeah, in general.
Okay,
how present I am on
okay, of course, because you are a focal person. If you would spread bad words, then that would have a bigger impact. And if you spread positive, of course.
That's why Jan Reker is always upgraded to the business class when he flies from Australia to Europe.
Very nice, very interesting. And that's happening in the US. Okay. Any further comments, questions? Huh? Okay, I received a number of signs that time's off from my staff to prevent them carrying me down the stage here. Let's have a coffee break. I would like to really cordially thank all of you for this lively discussions, and Peter, once again a warm applause to your presentation.